The metal teeth of my harvester stopped inches from her Porsche's cherry-red rear bumper. The only thing between it and 2 tons of angry steel was a pair of fuzzy dice dangling from the mirror. I could hear my cows bellowing from the barn behind it, heat-struck and hungry. And I could hear Karen's voice in my head, all smug from earlier that morning when she blocked the barn door with her keys in hand, saying, "It's just for a few hours, babe, I need the aesthetic for my yoga retreat." My hands tightened around the steering wheel as the engine roared to life, and I realized I was about to do something unforgettable, maybe even unforgivable depending on which side of the fence you stood on. And all I could think was, not today, Karen, not during feed time. 12 hours earlier I had been sipping lukewarm coffee on the porch, watching the sun creep over the cornfields, when Roy rolled up in his dented pickup to drop off a new water tank for the goat. We chatted about the heat wave, the price of diesel, and how Martha's prize hen was now brooding on a pile of golf balls. Small town stuff. Peaceful, predictable. That was until Karen showed up at the farmer's market like a storm cloud in Lululemon. She was newish to town, one of those HOA royalty types who treated rural life like a weekend Instagram filter. Her husband apparently made money from something involving tech and teeth. I never did get a straight answer. What mattered was that she'd been poking her nose into farm business lately, trying to turn our town into her version of a wellness utopia. This morning she lost it over a missing jar of Manuka honey from her pre-reserved order and accused me of hoarding it for my livestock. I laughed because the goats do like sweet things, but that didn't help. She threw a tantrum, a real foot-stomping, high-pitched spectacle in front of half the town, then stormed off yelling that I'd regret embarrassing her in public. I didn't think much of it until I came back to my farm and saw her Porsche backed up to my barn door, parked so tight it was kissing the lock. No note, no explanation, just Karen's signature move, entitlement, parked on 4 wheels with a hint of citrusy air freshener. I called her. No answer. I texted. Nothing. I even walked down to the yoga camp she was hosting a few fields over, but got intercepted by one of her personal assistants who looked like he'd been trained in polite hostility. I paced, I fumed, and then I heard the cows. It was near noon by then, and the inside of the barn was cooking. I had fans installed, sure, but without the doors open to circulate air the temperature climbed fast. That's when it stopped being annoying and started being dangerous. Livestock doesn't care about petty vendettas, they just need care. I called the sheriff thinking maybe they could tow it, but since it wasn't technically a public road, they couldn't touch it without a court order. Days, they said. I had hours maybe. I called Roy. He said what I already knew, you're gonna have to move that thing yourself. I could hear the smirk in his voice. You still got the big green beast gassed up. The big green beast. My harvester. My pride and joy. The one I only pulled out during peak season or when things got biblical. It had blades the size of surfboards and an engine that could wake the dead. And it just so happened to be parked 30 feet away, purring with fuel and ready for glory. I didn't go rogue immediately. I tried common sense. I taped a polite warning note to the car. I gave it another hour. I even went to town hoping she'd come to her senses. But when I got back and saw her lounging under a canopy laughing with a circle of crystal-wearing influencers, I made my choice. I called Martha first. She used to be a lawyer before she traded it all in for goat cheese and solitude. You're covered, she said after a quick read-through of local AG laws. Emergency livestock access on private land with equipment necessary for animal welfare. Take pictures. Film everything. Wear a nice hat. I liked that last part. So I rallied the town. Or at least Roy, Martha, and the intern who milks cows on weekends. They brought phones, lawn chairs, and sweet tea. I climbed into the harvester, adjusted the seat, turned the ignition, and rolled forward. Real slow. Real steady. It was like preparing for a mechanical ballet with a metal-crunching finale. The first touch was subtle. A slight nudge. The Porsche creaked like an aluminum can under a boot. The second was more assertive. The hood began to crumple, the mirror snapped off. I kept filming. Everyone was silent except Roy, who muttered holy moly, and Martha, who whispered this is better than cable. By the time the front end was mashed into modern art, I had enough space to open the barn doors wide, and the rush of fresh air into that heat box made the cows practically cheer. They didn't care about lawsuits or yoga or Porsches. They just wanted to breathe and eat and moo. I parked the harvester, stepped out, and looked at what I had done. It was both horrifying and magnificent, and entirely preventable. But Karen had chosen drama over decency. I was just the guy who answered. Later I'd find out the video had already hit social media thanks to the intern. The views were climbing, the hashtags were brutal, and the memes were merciless. Porsche pancake trended for 5 hours straight. Karen wouldn't know until morning what had happened, and I had no idea yet just how far she'd go to get revenge. But in that moment, with the barn open and the cows safe, I didn't feel petty. I felt practical. And maybe just a little vindicated. Because when someone parks a sports car between you and 20 lives depending on you, it's not just about convenience anymore. It's about doing what needs to be done, even if that means driving a harvester through a Porsche while the whole town watches. And this was only the beginning. The sun had barely risen when Karen returned to the scene of the crime, or at least what she considered to be one. Her Porsche, or what was left of it, sat like a crumpled soda can in front of the barn, the paint chipped and curled like burnt bacon, the windshield cracked like spiderwebs after a storm. I was already up feeding the goats when I heard the screech. Her designer flip-flops slapped against the dirt as she stormed toward the wreckage, her voice pitching louder with every step. She shrieked a wordless wail, a sound so intense it sent the ducks scrambling into the pond like there was a hawk in the sky. I stayed quiet. I knew what was coming. The pointing, the threats, the accusations of male aggression and rural barbarism. And right on cue, she turned, phone already out, camera facing her, tears perfectly timed. "This man destroyed my vehicle. Look what he did. He's dangerous. Someone tag my lawyer." The way she paced in front of the car, flinging her arm toward it like she was hosting an infomercial for pity, would have been funny if it wasn't so obnoxious. I leaned against the fence post, sipping coffee, letting her monologue for her audience. Eventually she noticed me, or maybe she just needed a villain for her video. She stormed over, still recording, eyes blazing with a fury only an influencer on the verge of going viral can summon. "You're going to jail," she snapped. "Do you know how expensive that car was? I'll see you in court." I finished my coffee and motioned toward the laminated paper stuck to the barn door. It was the law. Emergency livestock access. Cited. Highlighted. Sealed in plastic. Her lips moved as she scanned it, but I could tell none of it registered. The words bounced off her like rain on a duck's back. "That's not real law," she spat. "My husband's lawyer is going to eat you alive." I said nothing. I just walked back toward the barn as she shouted after me. Every insult rolled off. This wasn't about the Porsche anymore. It was about the principle. The cows had needed me. I'd acted. She'd blocked life-saving access for vanity, and the law was clear. But Karen didn't want logic. She wanted a stage. By mid-morning, the first of the news crews had shown up. Apparently, someone had sent the video of the incident to a local station, which then passed it along to a national affiliate. When I saw a van pull up with a satellite dish and a lady in heels trying to step over cow pies, I knew it had escalated. The reporter was professional, surprisingly polite. She asked for a comment. I kept it short. I opened the barn to keep animals alive. I filmed it because I knew she'd sue. The law's on my side. Then I went back to work. Karen, on the other hand, gave 3 separate interviews, each one more dramatic than the last. She clutched her yoga mat like a shield, wore a shirt that read "spiritual not stupid," and claimed PTSD from the sound of heavy machinery. She said she feared for her life, that the harvester had emotional energy that triggered her trauma. Meanwhile, the internet had already dubbed her Porsche pancake and layered auto-tuned remixes of her scream over dance beat. The town hadn't seen this much excitement since the mayor's llama escaped during Founders' Day. Martha and Roy stopped by around noon. Martha brought lemon bars and legal printouts. She had found 2 more clauses supporting my actions, including one that covered heat-related emergencies for livestock. Karen didn't stand a chance in court, but she was already trying the case in the court of public opinion. Roy chuckled as he scrolled through the latest memes. One showed the harvester wearing sunglasses with the caption "Don't block what you can't out-harvest." Another had Karen photoshopped into a NASCAR pit stop getting crushed by various farm equipment. It wasn't kind, but it was karma with a soundtrack. That afternoon, the sheriff showed up, not to arrest me, thankfully, but to document everything. He had a stack of papers from Karen's lawyer demanding a civil investigation. He looked tired. I gave him the footage, the time-stamped feed logs, the vet statement about animal risk, and the weather report showing heat indexes high enough to cook an egg on a shovel. He nodded and said, "Off the record between you and me, I'd have done the same thing." Karen, meanwhile, hadn't let up. She was now claiming that I had used the harvester as a weapon. She called it vehicular intimidation and said she was afraid to leave her luxury estate. Then she made the mistake of trying to use the HOA to push back harder. That's when things really got interesting. See, Karen didn't just live under any HOA. She practically ran it. Or thought she did. The estate was filled with semi-retired executives who liked peace and golf, not drama and court battles. She'd been lording over them for months, pushing for organic-only landscaping and banning American flags because they didn't match the color palette. Now those same board members were being dragged into the media spotlight because of her antics. One HOA officer called me privately and said, "Just so you know, we're not backing her. She's acting alone." But I could tell they were nervous. If she kept pushing, this wasn't just going to be a feud. It would turn into a PR disaster. Especially when it turned out she'd submitted her HOA complaint using forged signatures from neighbors who had never even attended the meeting. A clerk at the county building flagged it after seeing the video and recognizing the same pen stroke used for 5 different names. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the barn and the still-parked wreckage of what used to be a Porsche, I felt a strange peace settle over me. Not because it was over. It wasn't. But because something had shifted. Karen had assumed the rules didn't apply to her. That she could weaponize influence, luxury, and a good crying face. But she underestimated something more powerful than any engine. A community that sticks together. A town that remembers, and a farmer who knew how to push back without ever saying a word. That night, I saw one final post on social media that made me laugh out loud. It was Karen herself this time, clearly trying to regain control of the narrative. She sat on a yoga mat, backlit by candles, surrounded by incense, speaking in a soft but strained voice. "I've chosen to forgive the man who ruined my car. He clearly lives a hard life. I wish him healing and perspective." She signed off with namaste but forgot to mute the mic before whispering, "I hope his cows all get pink eye." The comments tore her apart. I shut my phone off and looked out at the barn. My animals were fed. The doors were clear. The harvester was parked and clean. And Karen's Porsche was still exactly where it needed to be. A very public reminder of what happens when you park arrogance in front of responsibility. And tomorrow wasn't promised to anyone, especially not to Porsches parked in the path of justice. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled, and smelled faintly of coffee and old files. It wasn't the kind of place that normally hosted high-drama legal battles. Usually, Judge Miller dealt with zoning disputes, farm boundary spats, and the occasional property tax tantrum. But today, he had a front-row seat to Karen versus common sense. She sat across from me, decked in beige business casual with a neck brace she definitely hadn't been wearing the day before. Her lawyer looked bored already, flipping through a folder that was far too thin to carry any real weight. I came in with Martha and 3 binders stacked high with documents, timestamps, animal care logs, weather data, and statements from half the town. Karen opened strong, theatrically dabbing her eyes as she claimed irreversible psychological distress, harassment through agricultural machinery, and destruction of luxury property valued at more than $100,000. She told the court that I had purposely weaponized a harvester to make a statement and then claimed she was trapped by my rage and unable to move her car. When the judge asked why she had parked in front of a clearly labeled barn door with 3 "Do Not Block" signs, she said it was a temporary photoshoot location and that the lighting was ideal. Judge Miller blinked twice and scribbled something down without saying a word. Then it was our turn. Martha handed over the animal health documentation and cited the specific emergency access clause in the state's agriculture laws. We showed the temperature records from that day, the vet's written warning about the danger of heatstroke in enclosed barns, and the sheriff's own observation report confirming the block. I even had footage from the moment I paused before touching the car, giving every possible chance for someone to intervene. The judge leaned forward when we played the security cam audio with the cows bawling in the background. The room was dead silent except for that echo of desperation from the animals. Karen's lawyer tried to interrupt, claiming emotional harm, but the judge held up a hand and asked one question. Did your client make any attempt to move the vehicle after being contacted multiple times? The silence was louder than any argument. The judge finally leaned back in his chair and said he'd take the matter under review, but noted that the evidence heavily leaned toward justifiable action during a documented emergency. Karen's face cracked for just a second. Her smug shield faltered as she realized her plan wasn't working. She wasn't just losing the case. She was losing control of the narrative. Outside the courtroom, the cameras were waiting. Karen tried to slither past them, but one reporter caught her with a microphone and asked what she thought about the meme, Porsche pancake. She hissed that this was a gross invasion of privacy and stormed toward her car. Well, her rental. The original was still in my barn driveway, now considered evidence for the insurance claim. I took no pleasure in seeing her rattled. But I did take satisfaction in the fact that, for once, the system hadn't buckled under someone with money and volume. Back home, things were calm for a few days. The animals were thriving, the news cycle was slowly shifting away from the viral drama, and I started to believe that maybe Karen would finally back off. But I underestimated how deep her claws went into the local HOA. One morning, I woke to find a letter shoved under my door. Not mailed. Just shoved. It was from the HOA board, citing new bylaws restricting the operation of heavy machinery within 600 feet of community boundaries. They'd redrawn their plat map overnight, extending the community edge right up to the border of my farm. I knew exactly what this was. Karen was using the HOA as a backdoor weapon. If she couldn't win in court, she'd try to strangle me with bureaucracy. But what she didn't realize was that my grandfather had registered our property's right-of-way access with the county 50 years ago. It was grandfathered in. Not only could I operate equipment on that lane, I had legal easement that trumped any HOA regulation. Still, it was a headache. I had to dig through old files, call in a surveyor, and file a formal objection with the zoning office. Then Roy called, telling me something even worse. Karen had filed a rezoning request for my property, listing it as a semi-commercial operation, a move that would slap me with dozens of compliance restrictions and noise ordinances. Her goal was clear. Tie me up in red tape. Make life miserable. Force me to sell. I felt the old rage bubbling again. This wasn't a feud anymore. It was a siege. And she was playing a long game. Luckily, Roy had a niece who worked in the zoning office. She scanned the paperwork and caught something odd right away. One of the signatures approving the rezoning petition belonged to a local official who had died 2 years earlier. Another was from a resident who moved out of state. The dates didn't match. The ink was consistent on all signatures. It didn't take much digging to confirm that Karen had forged them. We submitted a report to the county ethics board. And just like that, Karen's brilliant strategy began to implode. The county launched a fraud investigation, freezing all HOA legal activities tied to the petition. Karen stopped showing up to her yoga event. Her face started disappearing from the flyers in town. Rumors spread that she was being quietly removed from the board, pressured by neighbors who didn't want the HOA caught up in criminal charges. One of them even visited me to apologize for the chaos. Said they'd been manipulated and didn't know how far she was going until it was too late. But I didn't let my guard down. Karen might have been on the ropes, but she wasn't done. She filed a last-ditch complaint with my insurance company, claiming emotional distress and environmental disruption. I laughed when I read it. She actually tried to claim that my harvester had disrupted the natural energy of the land and caused spiritual disharmony. My agent nearly choked reading it aloud. Denied immediately. Still, the pressure took a toll. I started locking the gate earlier. I triple-checked the barn doors at night. There was always a sense that something else was coming. Karen didn't know how to lose quietly, and I had a strong feeling she was going to make one last move. But I was ready for it. My land was in order, my documents airtight, my community alert, and the harvester well-oiled and gleaming in the sun like a sleeping dragon. Then, one evening, as I was sitting by the pond watching the ducks bicker over leftover corn, I saw a car pull up at the far edge of the road. It was sleek, dark, not local. A man stepped out, scanned the property, and made a call. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the body language. He wasn't here to buy eggs. I watched him get back in and drive off without a word. The next day, I'd get a notice from a corporate entity claiming interest in developing a wellness retreat adjacent to my farm. The name on the registration was familiar. Karen's husband. So she wasn't done. Not by a long shot. But what she didn't know was I had already filed paperwork of my own. Paperwork that would make her next move the biggest mistake yet. The war wasn't over. But the battlefield had just changed. And this time, I was bringing more than just a harvester. I was bringing every legal tool she thought she owned and turning it back on her with the force of 1,000 cows fed on righteous fury. The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, tucked inside a glossy folder stamped with gold lettering that screamed overcompensation. Sunwell Living, LLC, Transforming Wellness. Inside was a formal proposal outlining their vision to build a holistic retreat center on the plot of land bordering my south pasture. It promised nature therapy, chakra gardens, guided silence zones, and something called sound bathing. There were artists' renderings of yoga domes, mediation pavilions, and people walking barefoot across manicured gravel paths with unsettling serenity on their faces. But I wasn't fooled. This was Karen's doing. The name on the bottom line was Richard Palmer, her husband. She'd failed with her Porsche, failed with the court, failed with the HOA, and now she was trying to quietly suffocate my farm by surrounding it with her dream of an influencer paradise. At first glance, the plan looked legitimate. They had zoning petitions, architectural drafts, letters of endorsement, and scheduled hearings with the county board. But that was exactly what made it suspicious. No one had reached out to adjacent landowners. Not one notice had been posted publicly. And when I cross-referenced their zoning application with the local planning board system, I found a dozen irregularities. Missing dates, unsigned plats, and worst of all, surveys that were fabricated entirely. The land they claimed to border was off by several feet. And those several feet were mine. That's when I made my move. Weeks earlier, when Karen had started pushing her HOA harassment campaign, I'd taken a quiet trip to the county office and filed a provisional conservation easement on my southern boundary. It was a program that incentivized preserving agricultural land and allowed me to legally block any development that might disrupt natural farming patterns. The filing was pending back then, waiting for an inspection. But after the incident with the Porsche and Karen's legal stunts, the inspector came out fast. We walked the fields, reviewed the animal routes, and by the end of the day, he shook my hand and said, "I'll have this approved in 48 hours. Now, with that easement recorded, any construction within a 100-foot buffer zone was dead in the water. And that buffer zone? It covered the entire area Karen's husband had just purchased. Still, I didn't stop there. I knew Karen wouldn't go down without dragging others with her. So I called the Agricultural Extension Office and asked about her retreat's proposed water usage. According to her filings, she planned to dig 2 wells and redirect runoff from my adjacent field into their filtration pond. I nearly choked. Not only was that illegal without my permission, it would have disrupted the natural slope of my pasture and flooded my irrigation trench every time it rained. I gathered drone footage, drainage records, and even brought in a hydrologist who happened to be Roy's cousin. Within a week, we had a documented report showing the project would violate state-level water protection laws. I sent it directly to the county board and copied the local press. Within days, the story exploded online. "Yoga Retreat Threatens Family Farm's Water Supply" became the headline that buried Karen's hopes under a pile of angry reader comments. Animal rights advocates, rural voters, and even a local veterans group all started reposting the story, turning Karen's peaceful branding into a PR nightmare. She tried to spin it, issuing a press release about her commitment to the earth and mindfulness, but it backfired spectacularly when a video surfaced of her yelling at a chicken for pooping near her Range Rover. That clip played on late-night TV and pretty much ended her dream of being the face of enlightened living. Meanwhile, on my farm, life went on. The cows were happy, the eggs kept coming, and my mailbox was flooded with support letters from neighbors and people I hadn't spoken to in years. One woman dropped off a pie with a note that read, "For crushing Karens and crops alike." I didn't eat the pie, because I'm cautious, but I appreciated the gesture. The best part, though, came a week later, when I got a certified letter informing me that Sunwell Living had officially withdrawn its zoning application. There was no press release, no apology, no explanation. Just a silent retreat of its own. That night, I celebrated with Martha and Roy over grilled corn and root beer. We sat on the porch and watched the sunset drape the pasture in gold. For the first time in months, the air felt light again. But just as I was thinking it was over, Roy squinted into the distance and said, "You might want to see this." Down at the road, a moving truck was parked outside the Palmer residence. Karen was shouting instructions to 2 men who looked like they regretted every decision that led them to that moment. Boxes were being thrown into the back like her brand new start couldn't come fast enough. But what really sealed it was what happened the next morning. I went to the barn and found a folded piece of paper taped to the harvester's side mirror. It was a handwritten note. Just 3 lines. "I underestimated you. You fight dirty but fair. I'm leaving. Don't forget to move that car. It's still yours now." I stared at it for a while. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. The Porsche, still bent and broken, had become a kind of monument. I wasn't sure if I'd sell it, scrap it, or turn it into a chicken coop. But it stayed where it was for now, sun-bleached and symbolic. A few days later, the town held a small event to celebrate Local Agriculture Week. Nothing huge, just some tents, games for kids, fresh pies, and a community meal. Martha had the idea to bring out the harvester and park it in front of the main tent. We decorated it with streamers, and someone printed a sign that said, "Emergency Response Vehicle," in big red letters. The crowd laughed, took photos, and for a few hours it became a local legend. Kids climbed into the driver's seat, pretending to run over invisible sports cars, and their parents swapped stories about the day Karen's ego got mulched. When I gave my short speech, I kept it simple. I thanked everyone who stood by me, praised the strength of rural communities, and ended with a line that stuck. Farming isn't just about crops and cows. It's about holding the line when people try to pave over what matters. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Roy handed me a cold drink and said, "Think she'll ever come back?" I looked out over the pasture, the barn lit up gently behind us, and shook my head. Maybe. But she won't come back the same. And this place? It'll never be hers again. We sat there for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of crickets, the occasional lowing of a satisfied cow, and the breeze rustling through the corn. The battle was over. The fields were safe. The harvester, polished and parked, stood silent beside the barn, A reminder that sometimes, in the face of arrogance, all it takes is one firm pass down the road to set things right. It had been 3 weeks since Karen packed up her incense sticks, healing crystals, and designer luggage and left town like a storm cloud, finally giving up its grudge. Things had returned to normal on the farm, but normal had taken on a new meaning. Every day, someone stopped by just to shake my hand or drop off a thank you note. One kid gave me a hand-drawn comic book titled, The Harvester Avenger, where I was portrayed as a cape-wearing vigilante who crushed villains with oversized tires and saved goats from yoga cults. I laughed until my ribs hurt. My inbox had exploded with messages from across the country. Some from farmers who dealt with their own versions of Karen, others from folks who just enjoyed seeing someone finally push back. Apparently, the footage of her Porsche getting slowly eaten by my machine had been turned into a soundboard, a video game mod, and even a ringtone. One local journalist asked if I planned to capitalize on the attention and run for office. I told her no thanks. I already had too many mouths to feed and not enough time to babysit city council. But the idea that my moment of farm-based frustration had become a cultural reference point was surreal. A local t-shirt company even started selling merch with the phrase, "Don't block my barn," in bold print, and every time I saw one at the feed store, it felt like a strange blend of justice and absurdity. But the truth was, I didn't need a spotlight. I just needed my land, my animals, and some peace. Or so I thought. One quiet morning, just as the dew was burning off the grass, I noticed something peculiar. A sign had been placed just outside my fence line at the southern edge, nailed into a post that hadn't been there the day before. It was cheap, printed on foam board, and tilted slightly like whoever installed it did so in a rush. It read, "Private Meditation Access. Do not disturb." The logo in the corner was unfamiliar, but the style was eerily similar to the branding Karen used. I stepped over the fence line and followed the direction it pointed. Sure enough, down a narrow trail just inside the woods bordering my property, I found a canvas tent and a small wooden platform built around one of the oak. On it sat a man in flowing linen pants, holding a singing bowl and staring into space like he was waiting for enlightenment to be delivered via FedEx. I cleared my throat, and he opened one eye slowly, unbothered. I asked him what he was doing on my property. He calmly informed me that he was part of the new spiritual venture that had taken over after the retreat plans collapsed. He said he was told this was a shared boundary and that they had permission to set up serenity stations for the public. I asked who gave him that permission. He said, "Karen." I almost laughed. Almost. I told him to pack up and leave. He smiled and said he needed to align his energy first. I told him he had 10 minutes to align it into the back of his Prius, or I'd have Roy come down here with the cattle dog who didn't like strangers. That got him moving. But the larger issue was clear. Karen might have left physically, but her fingerprints were still smeared across the edges of my life. She had sold off part of her investment properties to shell companies and friends, and now these new age foot soldiers were showing up like spores on the wind. They were subtle, quiet, but invasive, like weeds you don't see until they've wrapped around your roots. I called the county again and filed a report on the trespassing. I reinforced the fence along that stretch and posted new signage. But what I did next was more permanent. I took that twisted Porsche, still sitting dented and dusty in front of the barn, and towed it out with the tractor. I rolled it straight to the southern boundary, parked it dead center between 2 trees, and had a local welder bolt it to a steel platform. Then I mounted a hand-painted wooden sign above it that read, "Blocked this barn. Now guards the land." Below it, I added a smaller line, "Private property. Keep out. This machine has history." Within days, it became a roadside attraction. People stopped to take pictures. Someone created a Google location pin. The local tourism committee tried to offer me a deal to make it a formal landmark. I declined, but I appreciated the sentiment. What I appreciated more was the message it sent. Karen's Porsche, once a symbol of entitlement and ego, had become a scarecrow in chrome, warning off anyone who thought they could casually overstep. Then came the final surprise. A man in a tailored suit knocked on my front door one afternoon holding a briefcase and a file. He introduced himself as a private mediator representing Karen's husband. He said Richard was looking to resolve lingering matters, and wanted to offer a settlement to make sure no further legal action was pursued over the zoning attempts or trespassing claims. He opened the folder and slid a number across the table. It was high. Stupidly high. I looked at it and asked what they expected in return. He said only one thing, that I remove the Porsche monument and agree not to speak publicly about any ongoing dispute. Essentially, they wanted to buy silence. I smiled and said I'd think about it. I didn't need their money. What I needed was for people like them to understand they couldn't put a price tag on dignity, land, or principle. So I turned the offer down. Politely. Firmly. And then I wrote a short letter, mailed it back in the same folder, and added one sentence. Keep your check. I've already been paid in full, by a town that still remembers who fed it when the roads were blocked and the air was too hot to breathe. The following weekend, I stood at the edge of the farm and looked out over everything I'd protected. The fields were green, the animals content, the fences sturdy. The harvester sat parked near the barn, newly washed and decorated with a little red bow someone had anonymously tied to its railing. I never did find out who. Maybe it was just a thank you from the universe. As I turned to go back inside, I saw a family pulling up in an old minivan. They had a young boy in the back, wide-eyed and holding a toy tractor. They stepped out and asked if they could take a quick picture with the famous barn and the Porsche statue. I nodded, told them to go right ahead, and watched as the kid beamed like he'd just met a superhero. And in a way, maybe he had. Not because I was special, but because standing your ground, even against ridiculous odds, even when it makes you look crazy, can still mean something. Especially in a world that seems to keep rewarding noise and nonsense. Karen had tried to pave her path to power over roots she didn't plant and ground she didn't understand. And in the end, she learned the hard way what happens when you block the wrong barn. The earth pushes back. And sometimes that push comes with steel teeth, local laughter, and a whole lot of mooing.